Now, when we talk about the crime bill, what we don't talk about was who Bill Clinton had to go through to get the crime bill passed. And as fate would have it, the group standing in his way to get that crime bill passed was, guess who? You guessed it, the Black Caucus. You've heard me say that there's no such thing as black leadership. And when I talk about black leadership, I talk about black leadership as being an extension of white oppression, because black leadership has to be endorsed by white America. If it's not endorsed by white America, then technically it won't be in a position to be black leadership. Now, there are advocates in our community that dedicate their lives to the upliftment and empowerment of our people, but those people don't receive an endorsement from the system. The black people that receive an endorsement from the system are extensions of the system. So they may look like you and I, but they are doing the will of the system. So when we talk about Bill Clinton and the crime bill, we don't discuss everyone that was involved in the crime bill, who the key players were. We really only focus on Bill Clinton. And we somehow forgot that Joe Biden has tooted his own horn and said that he is the creator of the crime bill.
Bobby Rush, member of Congress, said the other day, "I'm ashamed that I voted for the '94 crime bill." You ashamed of that bill?
Not at all. And in fact, I drafted the bill, as you remember.
I know that.
And by the way, we talk about this mostly in terms of Black Lives Matter. Black lives really do matter. But the problem is institutional racism in America. That's the overarching problem that still exists.
So we have Bill Clinton, we have Hillary Clinton, and we have Joe Biden all siding with the 1994 crime bill.
But in that bill, there were longer sentences. And most of these people are in prison under state law, but the federal law set a trend. And that was overdone. We were wrong about that. That percentage of it, we were wrong about. So the good news is we had the biggest drop in crime in history, in the first 8-year decline in crime in history. The bad news is we had a lot of people who were essentially locked up, who were minor actors for way too long.
I think a lot of African Americans want to hear, you know what, we made a mistake. Chelsea said she's heard you apologize, but went on to say that if the voter hadn't heard it, then, quote, it's clearly insufficient. Do you regret your advocacy for the crime bill?
Well, look, I supported the crime bill. My husband has apologized. He was the president who actually signed it. Senator Sanders voted for it. I'm sorry for the consequences that were unintended and that have had a very unfortunate impact on people's lives. I've seen the results of what has happened in families and in communities. That's why I chose to make my very first speech a year ago on this issue, Errol, because I want to focus the attention of our country and to make the changes we need to make. And I also want people, especially I want white people to recognize that there is systemic racism. It's also in employment, it's in housing, but it is in the criminal justice system as well.
Bill Clinton has said that the crime bill was problematic, and so has Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden, the person that's running for president now, still claims that the crime bill did a wonderful and great job.
Neighborhoods were not only safer, but they were more harmonious. And when the reason why the cops originally opposed my 100,000 cops for this community policing piece is because it's high intensive and it means they got to get out of their cars. So they literally got out of their cars and learned who owned the local drugstore, the local neighborhood bar, whatever. And they were engaged in the neighborhood, which built confidence so that the woman, the African-American woman living in a corner alone where the drug deal's going down in front of her house knows she literally used to have your phone number as a cop. She'd call you and say, John, they're out in front of my house, but you're not giving me away, right, John? No. And it didn't. So we had enormous success.
I want to be very specific with this. That this 1994 crime bill was specifically for the black community. So we have Hillary Clinton and we have Joe Biden, who else helped Bill Clinton get this 1994 crime bill passed? Now remember I said there's no such thing as black leadership. And what they don't talk about when it comes to the crime bill, they don't talk about who was the driving force for Clinton to get the crime bill passed. There was one group that was standing in his way, and that one group made it possible for Clinton to get that crime bill passed. Now at first, the Black Caucus was against the 1994 crime bill. As I've already stated, this crime bill was going to specifically target the black community. So why would the Black Caucus be against the 1994 crime bill and then be for it? What made them have a change of heart? Now, John Lewis was against the crime bill, but yet he gave Bill Clinton his vote. In fact, I read several articles that talked about how much pain and angst he had in giving that vote for that crime bill because he was against it, because he knew what it was going to do. And he did not give the vote to Bill Clinton in good faith. The decision tormented him.
Violence, America's #1 civil rights problem. But many said the answer is not in the crime bill's call for more police and prisons. Religious and political leaders agreed today to spend more time teaching respect for life and the dignity of others.
Is that going to stop the crime problem next year? The answer is no. But will it, in fact, put us on a course to bring about real and meaningful change on a long-term basis? The answer is yes.
Listen to what Bobby Rush said about the crime bill.
Former Secretary of State has been trying to clarify her husband's remarks on the law without trying to denounce them. Now, Bernie Sanders, along with 187 Democrats, voted for the bill in 1994, and he is now criticizing President Clinton, saying that he needed to apologize to the American people. Joining me now is Congressman Bobby Rush, who voted in favor of the crime bill in 1994. He has endorsed Hillary Clinton. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Tamron, it's my pleasure.
It always is great to talk to you. Let's put some perspective on what was happening. You were there 22 years ago. Do you believe the way the crime bill is being described now versus what was happening on the ground in some of that video, is it matching here?
Tamron, let me start out with this. I am ashamed of my vote. I sincerely apologize to my God, apologize to my community, to my family. That was the worst vote, as I look back over the years, that I've taken since I've been in the Congress.
And again, you must ask yourself, if members of the Black Caucus were so against the crime bill, why did they relent and end up giving the vote to Clinton for the crime bill? It just doesn't make any sense to me. But traditionally, this is what happens when you have black leadership, because black leadership is an extension of white oppression. That means black leadership will go against their better judgment to push and promote and implement a white agenda. And when I say a white agenda, I mean one that's anti-us. Now keep in mind, this crime bill was passed by the person that we consider to be the first black president. When you don't demand something for your vote, what happens is you get the brunt of everything bad. So there's no such thing as black leadership, nor will any of these black leaders have an actual black agenda. And when I say a black agenda, that is an agenda that will have us empowered. That is an agenda that will have us in a better position than we were 40 years ago. I mean, think about Bobby Rush now introducing this COVID-19 Trace Act. Do you think I trust him with our fate in his hands? Of course not, because he has a bad track record. He admitted that he made a mistake by giving this vote. He said it was the worst decision that he's made. And now he's going to lead something else that's going to greatly affect and impact our community. The only thing they have for us is COVID-19 vaccinations and tracing. That's it. They will use this virus to cover every issue in the black community.
I repudiate not the spirit, but the details of that bill. We have not accomplished anything other than further destruction of our communities.
So, Congressman, I then have to ask you, as you have mothers and fathers, I covered crime and reported in Chicago for 10 years. Having the former president hearing what you say now with this apology, is it enough, though? We were looking at a law that allowed for the prosecution of children 13 or older for certain crimes to prosecute them as an adult. There's no one who would doubt the sincerity of the apology you just presented. But on the campaign trail, you seem to hear the Clintons having it both ways, apologizing for the crime bill, but then pointing to some of the good, if that is even the word to use, that may have come out of it. Is that enough for the black community to hear an apology, sir?
And another problem we have in our community is we can't hold our leaders accountable. When they're here, we can't talk about them. And when they're dead, we can't talk about them. So there's no opportune time to actually hold our leaders accountable, because we always get compared to being sellouts or being for racism if we hold our leaders accountable. The only problem is we are putting our leaders in these positions because we are voting for them. If we don't vote for them, they don't get into these positions. So you must ask yourself, what do they owe us if we're putting them in positions?
I felt strongly during the inauguration, or the so-called inauguration, that I couldn't be at home with myself if I had to participate or be part of it. The movement taught us to withdraw from evil. And I never felt that his election was legitimate.
The white power structure would not use them if they didn't have influence over us. So we must hold our leaders accountable. We've been doing this for centuries now. We keep repeating the same cycle over and over again because we keep endorsing leadership that's not for our benefit.
I never saw him. I never met him. I would chair the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee for 3 years, from 1963 to 1966. I was involved in the sit-ins, the Freedom Ride, the March on Washington, the March from Selma to Montgomery, and directed the Voter Education Project for 6 years. But I met Hillary Clinton. I met President Clinton.
We are dooming today tens of millions of young people to a future of bitterness, misery, hopelessness, drugs, crime, and violence. And, Mr. Speaker, all the jails in the world, and we already imprison more people per capita than any other country, will not make that situation right.
And yet you voted for the bill because there were many provisions in it that you did like. How do you explain to communities of color today in particular why that yes vote was worth the cost, even though you saw the mass incarceration problem coming down the pipe?
I'll tell you why. Look, when you have a large bill, as you well know, Jake, that has many features in it, many provisions in it, you have to make a choice. And the choice that I had made is I had run for office. And this was back in '88 and again in 1990. You know what I said to the people of Vermont? And by the way, Vermont is a state that then had virtually no gun control laws at all. I said, we have got to ban the sale and distribution of assault weapons. That was way back then. And that's what I told the people. This bill, as you know, the crime bill did have a ban on assault weapons. It also had the provision in there dealing with violence against women. I made a promise to women. So I was on the floor. What you just showed is me understanding how bad aspects of that bill was. But I made a promise to the people of Vermont.
Our leaders willingly went against their own morality and better judgment to endorse a crime bill that they knew was going to be problematic for our community. I take that back. Not problematic, detrimental to our community. We had to contend with drugs being pushed in our communities and mass incarceration.
The problem with the crime bill and its implementation was that it was singularly focused. It was focused on locking them up, keeping them in jail, and there was, as you remember, there was a serious, very serious problem in terms of crime. It was this epidemic of crime in its beginning as a result of the crack cocaine drug wars and drug-related violence. It created a type of violence in our community that we had never witnessed before. We had never witnessed.
And it was also part, and Congressman, it was also a part, though, of a conversation involving the Rockefeller drug laws that had been passed in the Reagan years. So there was a trifecta of crime fighting that disproportionately affected the poorest of communities. You're in Chicago. Crime is still high. It is, in many ways, some believe proof that the war on drugs and some of these anecdotal things that we get behind as slogans don't work, and it is ultimately jobs.
Now, you all will say Democrats are for black people and Republicans are racist, but a political party doesn't matter if you don't have any demands. If you don't demand something for your vote, it doesn't matter who's in control because they don't owe you anything. What they are banking on is us not being informed. What they are banking on is us not reading. We must stop being emotional with our vote. We must stop saying things like the lesser of two evils as if there's a varying degree of evil. Evil is evil. So if you feel that both candidates are evil, then you shouldn't vote. Contributing to evil is still evil, which means you are evil. Making you think you don't have a choice when it comes to voting is still placing you in bondage.
So you go ahead and vote. So what? So you vote for a senator. And the senator's constituency is either lobbyists who represent big business or lobbyists who represent himself. So what? So you can vote.
There's been a lot of talk and a lot of shuffling of papers. But in terms of the plight of the black man in this country, there's been no perceptible change. Primarily because the white man has no reason to. He enjoys the highest standards of living. His government enjoys dominance in world affairs. Why should he turn to me now and say, I want to share part of my good fortune with you? He has no reason to.
I think there's going to be violence, see, because there already has been. I mean, when people try to free themselves, they kill Negroes in the South all the time. The Negro man has been emasculated and destroyed by the fact that every time he stood up, he got just snuffed out right there. So I don't think there's any question but that there's going to be violence and brutality. But my attitude is that the brutality and the violence shouldn't become the reason that you want to be free. But that's a very personal thing, the freedom is. See, the question isn't what is freedom to me, it's what price freedom. Because sometimes the price that you pay for freedom is the very thing that makes you a slave again.
Wait for it. Free blacks. Get money.